I was struggling to make ends meet, bouncing from one temporary job to the next, when I finally landed a position as a security guard at a large, sprawling warehouse. It wasn't glamorous work. Patrolling the premises, checking doors, and ensuring no one broke in. But the pay was steady. It allowed me to focus on my studies during the day. The warehouse itself was massive. Its enormous space filled with towering shelves stocked with everything from everyday items to expensive electronics. The cold was relentless, a biting chill that seemed to seep into my bones, and the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows across the endless rows of boxes and crates. Initially, the job was uneventful. I'd clock in at 11 p.m., lock up the building, and settle into the security office where I would monitor the cameras for hours. The monotony of it all was both a curse and a blessing. On one hand, it was easy money, but the endless hours of silence and solitude began to weigh heavily on me. I tried to keep myself entertained, reading books or listening to music quietly, but the warehouse's oppressive stillness had a way of creeping in, filling the air with an unsettling tension. As the weeks dragged on, I began to notice peculiar things. Sometimes faint noises would reach my ears, soft thuds, as if something heavy had been dropped, or the distant sound of metal scraping against metal. I'd find small objects out of place, like a crate slightly moved or a door that wasn't fully closed. I tried to dismiss these occurrences as mere figments of my imagination or the natural settling of the building, but the feeling of unease continued to grow stronger with each passing night. One particularly frigid night, the unease reached a new level. I was doing my routine rounds, checking the south side of the building, when I experienced an odd sensation, like I was being watched. It wasn't a fleeting feeling. It was a deep, gnawing certainty that something or someone was observing me from the shadows. I stopped and scanned the area, but there was nothing, just the quiet hum of the power generator and the rustling of leaves in the wind. I brushed it off as an overactive imagination and continued with my patrol. When I reached the final door on my route, I discovered it was unlocked. I distinctly remembered locking it at the beginning of my shift. A shiver ran down my spine as I opened the door and inspected the lock. It wasn't broken, and there was no sign of forced entry. The thought that someone could have been inside the warehouse, possibly still there, made my heart race. I double-checked the entire area but found nothing out of place. No sign of the intruder. Back in the security office, I scrutinized the camera feeds, hoping to catch something out of the ordinary. Everything seemed normal until I spotted it. In the corner of one screen, near the loading dock, was a figure, partially obscured by a shelf. My heart skipped a beat. Someone was in the warehouse. Frozen, I watched as the figure moved out from behind the shelf and began walking down the aisle, deliberately moving away from the cameras, disappearing into the darkness. They moved with a deliberate, almost predatory grace, as if they were familiar with every blind spot. My mind raced with questions. Who were they? What were they doing here? Why hadn't I noticed them before? I grabbed the phone and dialed the police, my hands trembling uncontrollably. They instructed me to stay put and assured me that officers were on their way. But I couldn't just sit there. I had to track the intruder. I cycled through the feeds again, but the figure had vanished. The warehouse seemed eerily quiet, too quiet. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police, my eyes glued to the monitors, anticipating the figure's return. Finally, I heard the wail of sirens and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The officers arrived and conducted a thorough search of the entire warehouse. They combed through every aisle, examined every corner, but found no sign of the intruder, no evidence of a break-in. They dismissed it as a false alarm or a trick of the light. But I knew what I had seen. The figure was real, and they had been inside the warehouse with me. In response, the company ramped up security measures, installing more cameras and motion sensors, but the sense of dread never left me. I began to dread my shifts, finding the silence and darkness of the warehouse increasingly unbearable. Every creak of the building and every flicker of the lights sent my heart into overdrive. As weeks went by, the unease grew stronger. Strange noises reappeared, soft footsteps in the distance, and occasional whispers that seemed to echo through the empty aisles. The cameras would glitch at odd times, showing fleeting shadows where there should have been none. The figure haunted my nightmares, perpetually watching, waiting. I couldn't escape the feeling that they were still there, hiding just out of sight. One night, I found yet another door unlocked, and fear gnawed at me more intensely than before. This time, I didn't bother calling the police. I knew they wouldn't find anything. The thought of confronting the intruder terrified me, but the thought of continuing to work in that warehouse was even worse. The next day, I quit the job, unable to handle the constant anxiety and overwhelming sense of dread. The company was understanding and didn't press me for details. Months later, the memory of that night still haunts me. I can't forget the eerie feeling of being watched, nor can I fully shake the fear that the intruder might return, slipping silently into the darkness, waiting to strike. Every time I pass a warehouse, I can't help but glance at the dark windows, half expecting to see that shadowy figure watching me from within. The whole experience changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, always glancing over my shoulder, questioning every little noise. Even in the safety of my home, every creak of the floorboards or gust of wind outside sends a jolt of fear through me. The once mundane task of checking doors and patrolling now seems like a haunting reminder of those sleepless nights. The warehouse's chilling atmosphere left a mark on my psyche, a constant reminder of how fragile our sense of security can be. The unease has seeped into my daily life, making every shadow and every unexplained noise a potential threat. I sought professional help to cope with the lingering anxiety and nightmares. Therapy sessions helped me confront the deep-seated fear that had taken root, but the sense of dread still lurks in the back of my mind. Each therapy session was a battle to reclaim a sense of normalcy, to distinguish between real threats and the ghosts of my past. It took months of working through my trauma to slowly rebuild my confidence and sense of safety. Yet, the experience left me with an unshakable wariness of dark, empty spaces, and a constant vigilance that colors my perception of the world. The psychological scars from those nights have become a part of who I am. I find myself avoiding warehouses and large, shadowy spaces, unable to shake the feeling that something malevolent is always watching. The fear that gripped me during those long, lonely nights is a part of my life now, a reminder of how deeply one's sense of security can be shaken by an unseen presence. The ordeal has fundamentally altered my view of safety and trust, leaving me with an ongoing struggle to feel secure even in the most familiar places. I have become acutely aware of how my sense of normalcy has shifted. What once was an ordinary routine now feels laden with unseen dangers. I often catch myself double-checking locks, scrutinizing shadows, and avoiding places that remind me of the warehouse. Even a seemingly harmless trip to a supermarket can trigger a pang of anxiety when I pass the loading docks and storage areas. The fear that once seemed so specific to the warehouse has woven itself into every aspect of my daily life, making ordinary situations feel fraught with potential threats. Sometimes, the sound of a creaking door or the murmur of a distant conversation can send my mind racing back to those sleepless nights. I've become hypersensitive to these sounds, interpreting them through the lens of my past trauma. The quiet hum of machinery or the soft rustling of papers now feel menacing, reminders of the eerie stillness of the warehouse that always seemed to be pregnant with hidden dangers. This heightened sensitivity has made it challenging to distinguish between real threats and the echoes of my own fears. I've also found that my relationships have been affected. Friends and family, while sympathetic, struggle to understand the depth of my anxiety. When I try to explain the persistent sense of being watched or the anxiety that accompanies me everywhere, it often comes across as an overreaction. This lack of understanding can make me feel isolated, as if the shadow of my past experience is something I have to face alone. It's a loneliness that compounds the fear, making it harder to find solace or reassurance in the support I do receive. Despite these challenges, I am slowly learning to manage my anxiety. I've developed coping strategies to deal with my fears, such as grounding techniques and mindfulness practices. These tools have helped me regain some control over my reactions and provided a way to address the irrational aspects of my fears. It's a gradual process, but each small victory helps me reclaim a bit of my former self and find a semblance of peace amid the lingering unease. The experience has also sparked a new perspective on my own resilience and vulnerability. I realize now how easily our perceptions of safety can be upended, and how our mental fortitude can be tested by circumstances beyond our control. While the fear still lingers, it has also deepened my empathy for others who face similar struggles. The warehouse may have been a place of darkness and fear, but it has also been a crucible that has shaped me into someone more aware of the fragility of security and the strength required to face one's fears.